A construction site, traditionally a man's domain. So what's a woman boss doing calling the shots in this hard hat kingdom? How has Maureen Farrell made it to the top? What's her secret?
The first thing you've got to do is get a wife.
But all things being equal, would women have an equal chance of success?
10:30 Wednesday
Or does
morning.
nature doom the sexes to different destinies? Equality is a right that women have had to fight for, and where the final victories have yet to be won. Today, it seems absurd that women should have had to fight to win the vote, the right literally to have their own opinions count. In hindsight, the tide was irreversible, as fairer education was extended to women, and with the coming of a world war, the old assumptions of what was women's work were swept away. But winning the vote didn't change the world.
We want equality. Now!
After the successes of the 60s, women saw that the momentum of change was beginning to slow down. In spite of the advances that their sex had won, true equality was still elusive. There was still men's work and women's work, and they were largely different. Whatever the work, a man was usually in charge. Persisting sex discrimination didn't help, but neither, say the experts, does the fact that we are different.
If we consider the possibilities of differences between men and women, I think to some people that looks like a giant step backward, because women have for so long been saying we are equal, we are equal. Well, equal does not necessarily mean the same.
I guess it goes against our egalitarian views. We don't like to think that there are gender differences or that there are differences between groups of people, that we all come out the same. And that doesn't really fit with our political and our emotional views of the way the world should work.
But the world works differently for men and women. Science now knows their brains are different. Experiments, like this word response test, confirm underlying sex differences in the brain, influencing what each sex is good at. But ability alone, as women know, won't guarantee success. Motivation and temperament count for just as much. And in this respect, too, boys and girls are not the same. At Rutgers Medical School, the researchers like to get their human guinea pigs young, before the world has left its mark on them.
She learns it pretty quickly, actually. I'm going to type in run.
Extensive tests have shown that a sex difference in temperament shows up early. Babies are seated in front of a screen and given a string they can pull to change the picture in front of them. Boys and girls learn equally fast, but they react differently when the switch they've learned to control is secretly disconnected. The boys keep pulling. Harder and harder. But with the girls, it's different. They get upset and give up. The difference shows in babies as young as 6 weeks. Call it stubbornness or determination, males seem to be born with more of it, according to Professor Lewis.
This difference between active attempts to overcome a frustration in terms of arm pull and anger in boys is really in sharp contrast to what we find in the girls, which is an attempt not to try to overcome, but to collapse in the face of this barrier.
Hundreds of experiments confirm early sex differences in temperament. Professor Lewis doesn't believe it can all be explained by the way we rear our children.
There must be a biological factor as well. It does not go unnoticed that boys are likely to bang on things and girls are likely not to bang. So we think there is a biological component as well. This biological component, we think, is related to what people have called temperament.
They started following the parade. Then Jack gave the signal, and all the
Born
little
with
mice
different
started running
temperaments,
everywhere
the
and
sexes develop different aptitudes at different
Finally, he was
speeds.
so startled that he roared very loudly and ran behind the tree. After
The
that,
average girl learns coherent speech as much as a year before the average boy. In reading and writing, too, girls have a lifelong advantage in fluency, which the boys never quite catch up to.
Ah, screamed Mouse.
Nonsense means the words make no sense at all, but you can still read them.
The nonsense words Diane McInnes is asking children to read are part of a study of learning difficulties.
Because there's no time pressure on this at all.
The words sort out children who merely memorize the shape of words from those who have learned how language really works.
black hen.
Of course, we find the major sex difference that everybody else is reporting in reading itself. So if you give a standard reading test, we found in our kids that the girls were better at both reading real words and also reading what are called nonsense words that are pronounceable. It's a very discerning test for subsequent reading ability.
Professor McGinnis' extensive studies in many different schools have convinced her that boys and girls take different routes to reading.
Hand.
The next word is thick.
Girls with better hearing skills from birth read and spell by sound.
Okay, got all the letters.
Now we're going to make it more difficult with 5 words in a row this time. All set?
Josh relies on sight, seeing the list of words in his mind's eye, a strategy which works fine at first.
4, shoe, clock, car.
Okay.
But as the list gets longer, memory alone
Rice,
can't cope.
Glass, house, spoon, door.
Rice, house, spoon, door, and
Brandon is a boy who seems to have everything.
Brandon's very bright, and things come very easy to him.
This is the life.
And reading came very easy to him. And the way that he figured out how to do it, although they were sounding out words in first grade, was basically with a visual memory. For a while, he pretended he could read when he really couldn't. He was memorizing the words. As time went on, Brandon's first grade teacher, Mrs. Speakman, was no longer fooled by Brandon's great reading ability. She started to see that with very new words, Brandon was having a problem sounding them out.
What's this word?
In reading difficulties, boys outnumber girls by 3 to 1.
Good. If that's tib, could you make it say stib?
Brandon's reading technique has been taken back to basics.
Can you touch and say stib?
Ib.
Each block represents a sound, so he can literally build words phonetically. He's having to learn how to read by sound and unlearn his private technique of learning by visual memory.
Okay. This was I in
Brandon's doing well because his teachers have recognized a basic brain sex difference.
He's excited about learning this new way. He's starting to succeed using this new way. Fortunately, with our methods, nobody falls through the cracks.
And what I want you to do is say the words back to me exactly the same way I said them to you.
Researchers are divided over how great the natural sex differences in verbal ability are.
Ice, nice, space.
A new statistical analysis leads some to maintain they've been exaggerated.
Run, jump.
So what we're seeing is a narrowing of the gap between males and females in verbal ability. In fact, I think we could conclude that the gap has closed in verbal ability for males and females.
Really, the most important point that I would make about that is that you have to look at the real world. When you see remedial reading classes with ratios of boys to girls of 3 to 1, you've got a sex difference there that's very important that you really need to pay attention to.
If girls inhabit a world of sounds and words, boys live in a world of things and space. Spatial ability is the skill to imagine things in 3 dimensions, to judge distance and perspective.
All right, ready, go.
Countless studies have revealed spatial ability to be one of the most striking differences between the sexes.
That's perfect, Michael. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Girls can copy a 2-dimensional picture, but manipulating a solid object poses problems.
But the moment you add that 3rd dimension to it, the boys seem to be much more efficient. And the age at which this emerges, at least where it's testable, is at about age 4, which is a lot earlier than people previously thought. It just seems to be something to do with the way the brain is organized, because certainly this, until recently, was a completely unrecognized ability. We still don't know what it is in terms of the fine processes involved, but it's some kind of awareness of more than 2 dimensions of visual information.
What I want you to do is
This sex difference in spatial ability grows more pronounced with
sometimes
age.
the pictures are turned in the photographs, so you have to imagine what it's going to be like when the blocks are turned. All right?
In this test, only 1 in 4 girls will do better than the average male. Could all this explain why men have a better sense of direction and seem more at ease with higher mathematics?
We know that from this point to this point, it's got to be the same.
A special summer school in Iowa.
In fact, is a right triangle. Okay.
Studies of thousands of mathematically gifted girls and boys like these reveal a gender bias, and that's regardless of background, according to Professor Benbow.
Basically, what we have found by studying now well over 1 million kids is that there are many more math-talented boys than girls. And depending upon the ability level that you're talking about, the discrepancies become larger and larger, such that if you look at the very extreme end of the distribution, what you find is that there's 13 boys for every 1 girl who are, for example, in the top 1 in 10,000 in mathematical reasoning ability. I want to point out we began with a totally environmental stand. When we first saw our gender differences, first we thought, we probably don't know what we're doing, so if we do this stuff again, it'll disappear. Well, we did it again. We've done it now for 20 years. We've tested well over 1 million kids. These gender differences, they're stable, they're robust.
It's a distance formula.
Analysis of variance.
In this statistics class, the subject matter may be beyond most of us, but intelligent, high-achieving girls and boys cope with it equally well. It's only at the highest levels that the sex difference comes in. But is that because we somehow make girls think that theorems are unfeminine?
I mean, I think it's very interesting that there are these big differences, and I think that one important explanation for them is just there's a difference in interest and there's a difference in family concern about learning mathematics, depending on whether it's a male or a female student in the family. This is very consistent with the finding that families are far more likely to buy a computer for their male child than for their female child. So there really are expectations in our society concerning how males and females should act, and those are carried out in the opportunities that are provided for children.
Camilla Benbow disagrees.
my personal view is that it's probably a combination of environmental and biological factors, and it may be that boys and girls come born just a slight bit different. Then you have the impact of the environment that would accentuate these differences rather than minimize them. And so, you know, a small difference becomes a larger difference because of the interaction of biology with environment.
What could that brain biology be? High-tech as this magnetic scanner may be, in many respects, we're still at the very frontiers of our knowledge of the brain. But we do know about its general structure and the geography of thought. We know that the left side of the brain controls language, delicate movements of the body, and practical, orderly sequencing. The right side controls visual and spatial abilities, abstract thought, and how we deal with our emotions.
I'm going to put the 5-pound weight on each of your ankles.
The first hint that men and women have different brains came from the evidence of stroke patients. Women with damage to their left brain, where the language lives, recovered their speech faster and more completely than men did. Men with identical damage could take 3 times longer to recover full language ability.
The lady was combing her hair.
That's because men's speech systems are focused in the left hemisphere of the brain. But in women, language also has control centers in the right hemisphere, which can compensate for left brain damage.
You weren't this good when we did it last time.
The interpretation of these kinds of studies has been that the division of labor between the 2 hemispheres may be more sharp, more pronounced in the male brain than in the female brain.
At McMaster University, there's a test which shows the wider spread of functions in the female brain. Each hand sends information to a separate side of the brain, and women do equally well with either hand. Sandra Whittleson found that boys do well only with the one hand which connects with one specific side of their brain.
The ability to differentiate between different shapes may be more spread out, may be a more bilaterally represented function in girls.
An acoustic version of the shape test has led other researchers to discover consistent differences in the layout of male and female brains. Different sounds are fed simultaneously to each ear, which is linked to each brain hemisphere. Women do equally well with both ears. Men do well only with one ear, the ear directly connected to the hearing control center in the left side of their brain. So in women, the division of labor between the left and right sides of the brain is not as distinct as it is in the male brain. In women, both left and right hemispheres are involved in language, both left and right in visual processing. But what difference does difference make? An explosion of research over the last 10 years has convinced scientists that dissimilar brain layout biases men and women to different abilities and skills. Professor O'Boyle.
We think that the superior language abilities that seem to characterize females, particularly in things like verbal fluency and so on, may be related to bilateral or both sides of the brain acquiring sophisticated language capability. Now that works well when it comes time to simply test them on the basis of verbal skills. But when it comes time, for example, to test them on spatial abilities, there may be a price to be paid as a result of this bilateral development of the language ability. So that resources or cortical areas or brain areas that might have been used to develop spatial abilities are in fact used up That is, they're already engaged with these additional verbal capacities.
Into the machine. And then we'll place
The University of Pennsylvania's neuroimaging unit has the most advanced brain scan technology. Tracking blood flow in the brain, they're exploring the very geography of the mental process. The gray to blue areas show low blood flow, areas of low brain activity. Yellow and red show researchers where the blood is flowing, where the mental action is. A woman's brain, it seems, is hardly ever off duty.
So the upper row are the men, the lower row are the women, and you just compare the baseline difference. The resting brains of women look as hot as the activated brain of men. You can see that the amount of activity in resting women is about as high as the amount of activity in thinking in men who are working on problems. Straightforwardly, it would mean that the rate of neural firing is higher and the rate of activity is greater. So presumably there is more going on in a resting female brain than in a resting male brain.
What happens when men and women apply their brains to the same task, like this verbal analogy test? Yet it's the identical task. In this test, the angle of the rods has to be estimated. Here, men's spatial ability should give them the advantage. Once again, men use a different part of their brain from women in approaching an identical problem. Now Professor Gurr can begin to relate brain activity with brain ability.
So when we see a performance difference between men and women, and we see a difference in brain between men and women, it gives us something that we can use as a tool in order to understand brain-behavior relationships.
Bottom.
Experiments with gifted children can relate brain activity to actual ability.
Eyes closed.
They have to say which face looks happier, top or bottom. Activity in the head is monitored.
Respond.
Bottom.
In gifted children, the right side of the brain is exercised far more than in normal children who use both sides equally.
Eyes closed.
What could this right-hand bias mean?
Eyes open.
What I think it suggests is that the right hemisphere plays an uncharacteristically important role in intellectual giftedness. It's as if there are additional resources in the brain that are available to these children.
Now the children are tracing a shape using back-to-front information from mirrors, very much a right brain spatial skill. What's the connection between mathematical giftedness and high activity in a part of the brain specializing in shapes and pictures? Have we somehow stimulated their brain? Have they trained them themselves? Or, as new evidence suggests, is it a magic that they're born with? Here, the clever monkey gets the peanut, a visual test where males outscore females. All females, that is, except those who in the womb were exposed to abnormal amounts of male hormone. The overdose gave them a male brain. Can prenatal hormones have the same effect on us? Holly and Heather are twins, born within 2 minutes of each other, but one of them has a genetic disorder which makes her different. Holly, who we met in Program 1, has only one female gene, and in what's known as Turner syndrome, hasn't developed ovaries. Ovaries produce a small amount of male hormone. So how does Holly's complete lack of male hormone affect the way she is?
If we're going south now, what direction would that be over there? When we're out in the car together, driving places, Holly doesn't have a clue where we are or which direction we should turn to get to where we're going, even if maybe we've been there. Right. As far as the girls in school, Holly seems to have more difficulty with math and has for a number of years now. As far as visualizing concepts in her mind and things in relation, geometry, things in relation to one another, that presents a problem because she just can't seem to visualize it.
Several studies of Turner's girls confirm Holly is not alone.
They have no difficulties in the linguistic areas, but they have severe difficulties with mathematics, for example. And they also have problems with orienting themselves in space. It's very hard for many Turner girls to find their way in new places.
But what about girls who have had too much male hormone? Again, studies show that girls exposed to abnormal amounts of male hormone in the womb, a syndrome known as CAH, have brains which cope better with sight and space, just like the boys. And they more than hold their own in the rough and tumble of the playground.
With respect to CAH girls, you see almost the opposite pattern. Their spatial skills are excellent, better than that of their sisters. And they also do very well in mathematics. And they do not have any problems in orienting themselves, finding the car in the parking lot and so forth. So we see almost the opposite pattern in the CAH girls as we see in the Turner girls.
Main, keep, run, could.
Turner's girl Holly is taking part in a test to see what it is, or isn't, in her brain that makes her so poor at math and map reading.
Tin, sad. Red, bid, hack,
Her twin sister, with the normal amount of male hormone, also takes part. Both do equally well at the verbal tests, but when it comes to dealing with shapes and things, Heather has no problem, while Holly is soon floundering. This test asks the twins to count the dots.
5.
To find out which parts of the brain they're using, the head is positioned so that the puzzle goes to one or the other eye, and so one or the other brain hemisphere. Holly was found to be using her right-hand brain, the side for visual processing, far less than normal girls, a standard finding with Turner's syndrome.
6.
We know that high levels of male hormone in the womb enhance spatial ability in the brain. So, do boys enjoy a natural advantage?
The thread that weaves its way through here may be this exposure to prenatal testosterone, enhancing right hemisphere development, assisting in the ability to handle spatial relationships and to mediate patterns and so on and so forth. And that's going to lead to high levels of mathematical ability. Who are those most likely to be highly mathematically talented? Who got the most testosterone? It's the boys.
She sells seashells by the seashore.
Researchers at a leading Canadian university found further evidence of the power of the hormones. Women's brains make them more fluent than men, but they do best in the middle of their menstrual cycle when female hormones peak. Now a visual test. Concentrating on the rod, decide when it's perfectly vertical. This is the right answer. Women do less well when their female hormones are high. Even at their best, they do less well than men. In men, small fluctuations in the male hormone improve performance on spatial tests. The research director is convinced that sex differences in ability have a hormonal root.
It would be surprising, I think, given the relationships we've seen between estrogen levels and certain abilities and testosterone levels and certain abilities. It would be surprising if this were not a major determinant of the differences that we see in males and females. I think it's our working assumption.
Engineering or mechanical design fits the male brain. Habit and expectations confirm it as a male domain. But is it just prejudice that accounts for so few female engineers, or does biology play a part in it?
I think that the idea that men and women should be equally represented in all occupations and all professions is simply ridiculous, given the data we have on their different ability patterns. People are going to choose generally to do things that they're better at. That isn't the only determinant, but it's going to be an important determinant. And so for those reasons, I'm sure we're never going to see, or we never should see, probably equal numbers of male and female engineers, let's say, or, you know, simply because the kinds of skills that go into that, for the most part, are not equal in the male and female population.
I like to think of the sexes maybe starting out fairly closely together as something running in parallel, and then society can bend that parallel further and further apart. Or you can actually bow it back towards the middle.
Okay. Which one of these two letters makes the S sound?
This one.
Okay, so we'll
One of the things that we're doing in our research now is to help little boys who tend to use visual strategies to learn to read, to get them to develop auditory skills, which are very, very important in being able to decode text.
Lips moved. How did they move?
They popped open.
Okay, let's try another one. How about that?
Boys' brains are better designed to see than to hear. But the sound of words is vital. Visual memory alone can't store enough words.
How about this sound? The P sound.
In Florida, they're helping boys connect sight and sound. Result, boys learn to read just as fast as girls.
Like the B. Jessica, will you put yours on the mat over here?
They're doing the same for girls, literally building up their spatial skills to remove the mystery of math.
Starting with your 1,000 cubes.
So if we recognize brain sex differences, can we and should we begin to iron them out?
We can build their basic skills so that no one needs to fail. Girls don't need to fail math. Boys don't need to fail to learn to read or spell or write. We'll still have sex differences because I think basically sexes have different interests. I don't think you're going to generate females who are suddenly interested in motor cars and hot rods and lying on their backs in the road covered in grease. No, I don't. But if they happen to need calculus in order to be a civil engineer because they love bridges, or they might need some kind of mathematics because they want to be a great architect, they'll have that skill. They won't have to say, I could have been a great architect, but I can't do math.
From the moment we're born, we display our lifelong preferences. Baby girls gurgle with pleasure at a face. Boys are transfixed by a thing that moves. Boys want to do, move, run, hit, kick, race, shove, fight for territory.
I said no, she may not move out because she's too young.
Girls play cooperative games, play at house, play at grown-ups. They tell stories, take on fantasy roles, make up dramas.
She didn't like it, so I probably won't like it either.
They explore the territory of personal relationships.
Because she's too young and she's not old enough. Look, she doesn't like this college.
Research shows that everywhere men and women opt for different occupations. Discrimination and custom play a part, but so does man's natural hunger for the mechanical, where women's literate and personal skills are less called for.
Many of these professions are dominated by men because they appeal to the male brain. Men go into driving buses because it's a spatial occupation. Women are verbal, they're talkers, they're not interested in being bus drivers at the same, to the same degree as men are, and so they have not sought positions in the community that really have a large component that appeals to the male brain.
That's beautiful.
Interest and ability are only half the story. Temperament and motivation complete the picture. At Rutgers Medical School, girls and boys are first given a fairly simple jigsaw.
Oh, beautiful job. Ooh, you are smart. Should we try?
Professor Lewis's test next calls for a puzzle deliberately too hard for them to do. The experiment, known as Shame and Pride, examined the reactions of hundreds of children.
It appears as if the girl child is more prone to evaluate failure, whether or not it was easy or difficult, whether or not it was her fault or not. She tends to blame herself. And when she does that, the emotion she's going to show is shame. We know that not only do girl children show more shame than boy children, but as adults, females show more shame than males.
Oh, your time's up. Time's up. There's no more time left on the clock. That was hard, wasn't it?
The female is likely to blame herself for the failure, and she leaves the scene. She drops out. When a male fails, he is less likely to blame himself and more likely to try to overcome that failure.
Too hard.
Boys, whether by culture or nature, are comparatively shameless.
I suspect that the differences in success between men and women have a lot to do with women feeling more shame than men when they fail. It is more costly for them to fail, that is, for the woman to fail, and therefore she will avoid situations in which she is likely to make a mistake. So there's a kind of cautiousness there, whereas the male is less cautious.
Posing as a TV game show, we investigated male and female caution and conformity, which Catherine Hoyenga, a leading expert in brain sex difference, has found divides the sexes deeply.
Females display more of the behaviors that we label as conformity. They are more likely to change their opinion, to agree with the opinion of somebody else in their current group than is a male.
The task on this week's edition of Guesstimate, what's the height of Toronto's CN Tower? What we were trying to measure is how suggestible each sex can be. Unknown to our competitors, we'd planted stooges to try to influence the genuine members of the public. Each time, the stooge is on the right.
200 feet. No, it's got to be taller than 200 feet.
I've been up 3 times now.
Yeah, it's way taller than 200 feet.
400.
I think it'd be taller than that, wouldn't it?
I don't know. You say.
No, it wouldn't be a mile.
No.
Half a mile?
Half a mile, maybe? Yeah, I think maybe half a mile.
4,000 feet.
Even that. I think even more than that.
Sure, why not? If you want to say that, that's fine.
Well, I'd say it's higher than that. Have another guess. I don't know.
10,000 feet.
10? Maybe 2,000.
2,000, okay.
2,000?
2,000.
What do you think?
Okay, yes.
How long have we got?
I'm easily swayed, 2,000.
But how suggestible are the men?
I think this would be about 4,000 feet.
No, I don't think so. No, not 10,000. 10,000's mountains.
I think it's about 3,500 feet.
Oh, jeez.
10,000 feet.
Nope.
1850.
You know what? It's the shape of it that makes it look a lot taller because it's long and skinny. Well, we have to get an answer, so
Okay.
I say 5.
No, let's not say 5. Let's say 12.
And the answer is
12.
Who wants to be a conformist? It sounds like such a terrible thing to be. But you can take a look at the behavior that's called conformity and relabel it. Label it as social sensitivity. Label it as willingness to change your opinion, especially when a contrary opinion is being expressed by a friend and someone you trust. So in that case, you might say the sex difference is in flexibility versus inflexibility.
Flexibility, give and take are female skills, the skills you'd look for in a medical practitioner, someone undogmatic who'd listen to you, care for you. Yet though just as many men and women start in medicine, few women make it to the top. Biology and culture command many men to climb the ladder of power. In the same way, biology and culture lead many women to wonder if that climb is worth it.
I think that men are going to continue to hold the majority of the high-level political positions. They have held the high-level political positions in every single society that's ever been studied. In every culture where there is rank, men tend to hold the enormously greater number of them than women do. Now, one could say it's because men are killing each other because of levels of testosterone in order to get to those positions and maintain them. And one could also say it's perhaps because of levels of estrogen that women don't want them. I mean, women influence people in different fashions. I mean, they certainly influence the next generation with the way they raise the young.
Mr. Hunnigan, pleasure to meet you. Welcome to the dealership.
The male hormone, testosterone, enhances the competitive drive in men and women. Research relates success in selling to high levels of male hormone. Studies in Europe and the United States have found that jobs which call for aggression go hand in hand with high levels of testosterone. And that's not only true of salespeople in the showroom.
When you look at this relationship between testosterone, aggression, and type of work, it's very complex, because if you look at lawyers, for example, those doing the hard, aggressive work, defending people or accusing people, they have higher testosterone level than those lawyers who do the paper and pencil works. It has been found that in women with high testosterone levels, there's a higher tendency to go into areas that are professional, that requires self-assertion, that requires a certain portion of aggression.
Yep.
So how does Maureen Farrow fit into all this? Construction cost analyst, company director, mother, wife, and advisor to government. Is Maureen the exception which proves the gender ability rule?
I think that women who do get to the top have been very competitive. They've had to compete. So they're competitive. They hopefully have done it as nicely as possible, but they've been competitive. It's silly to say they're not.
In most of the world, a working woman does an additional unpaid job looking after the family. Holding down a top job needs backup on the home front.
The first thing you've got to do is get a wife, because you cannot expect to operate on a 60 or an 80-hour week and remain sane and maintain a family life, etc., if you haven't got the support systems in place. When I look back, that was a very important decision my husband and I made when we had our son. We said, even if it costs all of what I earned at the time, we would use that money to buy the household help. And we still do. We have a 16-year-old, but we still have a housekeeper.
Just fine? Every night?
But Maureen Farrow doesn't see family ties as tying women down. She thinks women want different things in work and in life.
I don't think a motivating force behind women is power. I think it's intellectual challenge. I think it's acceptance. Professional acceptance is very important. But when it really comes to the crunch, I think women will tend to put personal relationships very high on the agenda. Most women that I know who are professionals really value their personal life very highly. and they're not on a power trend.
The different approaches of men and women at work have been extensively researched. Catherine Hoyenga gets to the heart of that difference.
Men seem to be concerned with trying to figure out where everybody else is on the pecking order compared to where they are. And they seem to enjoy becoming the leader of the group and being recognized as the leader of the group. And women are more often concerned with maintaining group functioning, making sure that everybody has a say, that nobody's feelings are terribly hurt. So females focus on keeping everybody in the group happy and functioning, and males focus on who's boss.
Some people like the cracker.
Success is also a matter of scruples and persuasion.
And if that's how you feel, you should just tell me. Don't worry about being polite. Okay? All right.
They're disgusting.
Okay. You don't want to take another bite to see how it is? No? All right. I'd like you to get the boy who's coming in here to eat as many crackers as possible.
We recreated an experiment involving children who were told they were doing a consumer test on some foul-tasting crackers.
What I would do is for every cracker that you can get him to eat, I'll give you $1. Okay? Okay, because this way it gives you...
Cameras secretly recorded the persuasive techniques of each sex. Bribery was a popular male approach.
If you eat another, I'll pay you $0.25. I will.
No, I don't like.
Let me try one. You have a Skittle.
Not your Skittles, are
Yeah. Okay, I'll pay you 50 cents.
Girls were more subtle.
they? These cookies are good for you. And she wants me to try and get you to at least eat 2.
Girls avoided outright lying.
How many did you eat? I can't tell you. I'll tell you after you.
Boys didn't.
They're pretty good. Just try another one.
No, they're not.
I'm not
They
trying
are.
another one. They're great.
No, they're not.
No, you have to chew it really fast, then swallow it really fast. And it helps you eat it. Like you...
And guess what?
What?
The lady said to me that you were a picky eater. I don't think that's true.
Girls turned on the charm.
Sure you don't want another one?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Just like in the original study of 500 children, we learned that each sex used different strategies.
Try another one.
No way.
Just one more.
Okay.
And we found that both had equal success. Difference is not the opposite of equality. Equality means the same chance to do whatever we want. Difference means we may not want to do the same things. We may have different priorities, values, thoughts on what life is for. Understanding that, men and women, is the real liberation.
The women's movement hasn't failed. If anything, women have failed to be men, and men have failed to be women. Boys will be boys, girls will be girls, and they will continue to seek the same kind of tasks that fulfill their basic needs in their basic brain.